Welcome to the video. It's been a while. You might remember, if you're a subscriber to this channel, that about 3 months ago I did a video on what it's like to retire, given that I've kind of been retired for a couple of years now. And in that video I talked about really looking after my health and my fitness. Well, about a month ago, when I was overdoing it in the gym department, I did my back in, and I think I'll know next week, because I had a MRI scan just the other day. I'll know next week whether it's a bulging disc or a herniated disc. But let me tell you, if you've ever experienced sciatica, which is kind of nerve pain down one leg or the other, um, if it's a herniated disc, which it feels like it has been, I can tell you sciatica doesn't come close. For the last month, I've been mostly crawling around on all fours, or shuffling to the toilet, and taking half an hour to get there. In incredible pain. It's almost like feeling like I've broken a bone. So my New Year's resolution to be fitter this year than I was last year is kind of is gone. Well, I was going to say something, but gone the wrong way, shall we say? Um, but I'm getting slightly better, so I am moving around with less pain now. But that's the reason why I haven't been doing videos. And even though I've been watching videos and I know that I get alerts when people have commented on my videos, I just haven't had the energy to kind of reply to those messages. And I will do. I'll get around to that because I'm feeling better, and it's getting better day by day now. But what I've been doing in the last month or so, when I've been able to sit down for 20 minutes or so, I've been listening to some records and buying records, and reading two or three books. And I'm going to talk about those in this particular video, just to kind of try and get me back in the groove and making videos. So, what I do sometimes, when there's one secondhand record shop around here that I frequent occasionally, but and I kind of go into the cheap bins, to be honest with you, because everything in the more expensive bins I've already got a copy of on vinyl or CD. So I'm looking for the stuff that I overlooked, the really kind of obscure stuff that nobody wants. But I've not been able to visit that. I've not been out much at all. So I've been scouring the pages of Amazon. And what I tend to do when I buy records off Amazon, and I know it's heresy to some people, but that is the easiest source of getting new vinyl and new CDs, for me anyway. So that's what I do. But I don't. I kind of use. I'd go through multiple pages. So in the bestsellers, I don't need another copy of Rumors or Hotel California. So I get down occasionally, if I sit there for half an hour, and I get down to page 74, and I come up with some kind of semi obscurities, or albums that I didn't even know were released, or albums that are cheaper because kind of nobody else wants them. So there's two or three of those in this little pile I've got, of albums I've been listening to in the last month or so. So let me just uh, pick up one or two of those. Right, the first one, the album I've been listening to, and this one's been on my radar for a year or two now, and it is Public Service Broadcasting: The Race for Space. It's one of these covers you can have either way. Oops, oh, that way, that way. And so imagine electronica with recordings of spoken word. These are like from NASA kind of broadcasts, but there's one that they've done on the Second World War, and there's two or three others. And I really love this one. It's got some really nice pulsating beats, but it's a bit like Future Sound of London in a certain way, where it has those beats, but it doesn't overwhelm you. So it's kind of good to listen to in a relaxed frame of mind. So I really, really like this particular album. And of course, I've hoovered up just about all of the others on CD since I picked that one up. So that's Public Service Broadcasting. It's been sitting around for that album, sitting around the record shops for a while before I finally got around to buying one of their releases. The second one that I bought is an old favorite band of mine that kind of fallen out of love with, really. But a friend of mine sent me a message saying that the this latest release of theirs is just not that impressive. Had I heard it, I was curious and say, okay, I'll give them one more go. And I bought this album, and it's The Likes of Us by Big Big Train. And I bought this on CD. And if well, then I listened to this once, and then I bought it on vinyl. So Big Big Train, kind of a progressive rock band. Um, whereas they wear their influences very prominently. It is, dare I say it, it's Genesis. So imagine, if you're a Genesis fan, imagine Trespass and Nursery Crime, the storytelling and the dynamic swings of the music, high melodicism, and then you pair those two albums, if you like, with Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering, which sounded better and slicker, and still way before they became a kind of a pop band. You can kind of sum up Big Big Train, and they've developed their own very English sounding style, where they've introduced, on top of the standard keyboards and guitars and fantastic drumming, um, a brass section, and violin, used very, very tastefully. And this is a very, very impressive album. So if you're interested in progressive rock that's accessible, that has echoes of that early period of Genesis, then Big Big Train are a fantastic band. And this album is far better than I expected it to be. I'm going to do a separate video on this album. Another one I bought is by Johan Johansson. This one is so well, it doesn't even tell you what it is on the front cover. This is called Copenhagen Dreams. So Johan Johansson, Icelandic composer, died a few years ago. Sigur Rós style, so lots of atmospherics. If you like viola and cello and the melancholic sound that those kind of provide, but at the same time you get those a bit of electronica in the background to kind of really mix up that sound, neoclassical style. This guy is or was brilliant, and his albums are great, and this one is no different. This has lots of different tracks. It's a soundtrack, um, very mournful, melancholic, but it's very, very listenable. It's really good. So Johan Johansson, and that is Copenhagen Dreams. I'll check the title again there. Blast from the Past. This is a typical one that I buy from page 74 in the Amazon listings, and that is Welcome to Whatever You Are by In Excess. And I think this might be the first vinyl release. Probably won't be, but I never considered getting it on vinyl because I had it on CD. It's the release that followed Kick, the famous New Sensation album. Um, this is an eclectic mix of styles, really, really good. Michael Hutchence was a fantastic frontman. I never saw them live, but what I've seen on video and the way he projects through the audio is brilliant. He's everything a frontman would be in terms of stamping his identity on the sound of this band, which, as I say, it's kind of really mixed and really interesting, uplifting but great ballad type tracks as well. So a little bit of a blast from the past. If you're an In Excess fan, you'll know this very, very well. So that was a pleasant surprise and cheap as anything on page 74. Um, this is a guy that I saw once, and I've got absolutely no recollection of the gig. I didn't even realize how many albums I've got of this guy. He sits there, um, in the alphabetical listings in my cabinets here. He sits right at the end, and of course that's Frank Zappa, and this is Overnight Sensation. I have to check this one, and I never really got Frank Zappa. It's probably one of the reasons why I have no recollection of that particular gig, and it was at the Nebworth Festival in 1978. But I started listening to Frank in this last month, and I've been pleasantly surprised. Is that sure it's complex? Sure, there's lots of arch humor, and he's got this very sardonic way with his lyrics, and his singing's not great. It's more like spoken word. But fantastic musicianship. So if you were a fan of Zappa and you really are really familiar with his music, then you're ahead of me by a million miles. you'll be familiar with this album and you'll appreciate how great his band is. A vast catalog, and what's amazing to me is that you can get a lot of the vinyl releases these days, but the CDs are they're out of print. And you go to kind of record guides or you look at listings of some of the great albums by some of the great 1970s artists, so, started in the 60s, of course, and went on for another 20 years. But there's loads of these albums listed worth hearing. But he's not always easy to get a hold of. But anyway, I've been listening to Frank Zappa, and more than that, I've had this book on my shelves for years, and I thought, yeah, Frank Zappa, I've got a book by him. I'll read it. So I've been reading this book here, Frank Zappa, the real Frank Zappa book, Frank Zappa, and basically what it is, he. I don't think he was an author as such. I think he basically was given a commission to record some audio in response to some questions. Maybe tell us some stories, Frank. And this guy here, Peter um, Occhiogrosso, I'll not say that again. This Peter fella pulled it all together, transcribed it, and then Frank edited it again, and then it went to the publisher. But it's got loads of stories in here, and it's very short. It's funny in places. I wouldn't say it's moving as such, but he lifts the lid on what it's to be like in a band and the politics of the band and the industry, and indeed on family life. And I was just reading a chapter on his family, which is really interesting. And I just think I'm going to read a little bit to it. Um, it's a section here he calls "How to." I'm just going to read just a half a minute of this or whatever. How to raise unbelievable children, and he goes on a little bit about not having friends and having a good family is better anyway. It's way better. And he says here, as far as rearing children goes, the basic idea I try to keep in mind is that a child is a person. Just because they happen to be a little shorter than you doesn't mean they are dumber than you. Lots of people make that mistake and forget how much value there is in raw intuition. Then there's plenty of that in every child. They may not have the verbal skills or manual skills, but there is no reason to treat them like they're inferior little lumps whose destiny is to grow up to be inferior big lumps like you. We all do the regular stuff. We do all the regular stuff, like trying to keep them away from danger and out of trouble. But after that, we have the responsibility of providing them with the basic data they're never going to get in school. To the extent that it is practical, we share with them our personal philosophies and attempt to impart to them what we like and what we don't like, so that we at least have some basis for understanding each other. But in the final analysis, we realize that they are organisms unto themselves. Whatever they're going to do in life, they're going to do, regardless of home instruction. And I mean, that's kind of a bit of a serious little extract there. So, none of the bad language or the funnies that are elsewhere in the book. But if you like Frank Zappa, you may have already read that. If you're curious, good book. Really enjoying that. But a chapter from the end now. Another new purchase this week, and this is way down in the Amazon listings as well. Cost me about less than £15, and it's a triple vinyl set of the Matrix soundtrack. Not one of the greatest soundtracks, but not bad. Nice package, but for the price, awesome. So listening to that just last week, I was well impressed. Really good. So you'll only be interested in the Matrix if you've seen the movie, and if you're interested, check out on Amazon or elsewhere. You might find it. It's not something I realized actually existed, but there you go. Bought a couple of albums by this band. Just got a couple more to talk about, and that is Yes. And these are the more recent releases. This one here, The Quest, from a couple of years ago. He says a couple of years ago. Maybe I'll check. 2021. Yeah, just a little bit more than a couple of years ago. This starts off with a track that's very reminiscent of classic Yes. Here's me trying to find the title. Yeah, it's called The Ice Bridge, and it's a 3-part suite, 7 minutes long. And then it just descends into adult-orientated schlock, which has continued on this album. To be honest with you, these are both very listenable. They're nice. They're pleasant. John Davison does a sterling job at mimicking John Anderson. Um, these are good, but they ain't gonna compete with the best. And I'm gonna do a video on Yes on their catalog shortly as well. In fact, that's overdue. Last album before I just touch on a couple of books, and that is another cheapie, and that's by Little Steven, but not the Disciples of Soul. This is Little Stevens and the Interstellar Jazz Renegades. It's the Lilyhammer score. Now, this it's got a subtitle here, Volume 2, Folk Rock Rio. So imagine, bossa nova type stuff, bits and pieces. I don't know, I can't count up all the tracks here, but these are little fragments of the soundtrack. I think there's only one track that's got any vocals on it. And there's one track called Out of the Darkness, which are released with the Disciples of Soul. That is a rock number, but this one is pared back. And it's kind of folk style, mambo, surf music, uh, rock, bit of jazz, bit of big band. It's very soundtracky, but the track, and it's an interesting listen, but it's a bit of an incoherent mess, shall we say, as a concept. It's the sort of stuff you'd put on your hard drive, or you'd put it on shuffle play, and these would be some short interludes between the other songs when you put stuff on random play. But I've enjoyed this. It's good. It's a good album. And of course, Little Steven was responsible, along with Bruce Springsteen, for writing the best songs for Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. And in his own band, he's still absolutely great. So yeah, that is a pleasant surprise and another good value um, purchase. A couple of books just want to touch on. Had this one sitting around for a while. Philip Roth, Everyman. Um, this is kind of about an old guy. I think he worked in PR. I read this about a month ago now. But it talks about what it's like to get old, and you kind of your friends and family kind of die, and then eventually he dies. It's like a story of every man, but it's just so beautifully written, so good. And I then picked up this one, and I'm reading, nearly finished the first novel in this American trilogy called American Pastoral, and the writing is absolutely fantastic. His attention to detail, and it's full of psychology, and it's full of social commentary, uh, contemporaneous events in the period that the novel's written, but really, really fantastic. Very, very impressed. And this one had been sitting on the bookshelf for a little while as well. So I eventually got round to Philip Roth. And then finally, 40 years ago, I read this novel, and we'll have all heard of it, of course, and it's George Orwell's 1984. And this is a compendium of some of his more famous novels, Animal Farm, Coming Up for Air, and so on. 1984. Now, I read it about 40 years ago, and just thought it was this dystopian novel. Was kind of quite shocking at the time, really. But ever since then, we've heard references to Orwellian language and newspeak, and some of the concepts that come out and are laid out in this novel. But as the last, when you think about the last few, because it was always in the future. Of course, it was written way, way back, and I think it's the 30s. So it was like 50 years ahead, really. Um, Someone's going to correct me on the date, but it was a futuristic novel. And these things back in the day when I read this, there was the technology didn't exist to make 1984 a reality. But in the last few years, technology's caught up. And what's been astonishing with, and of course, references to Orwellian language, um, we're now hearing on a daily basis. And the idea that you've got listening devices, phones and so on, and iPads and laptops, and with us all the time, and that we've now got things like the rewriting of history. We've got hate speech laws that one's coming into force in Scotland on the 1st of April. And I think Canada might already be ahead. And I kind of followed politics during the pandemic period and was checking in regularly what was happening in Canada. But that government in Canada has gone completely cuckoo, really off the rails. So I don't really follow Canadian politics on a daily basis anymore. I just think that country is lost from a political point of view, at least with Trudeau in charge. Um, but 1984 being read in 2024 is horrifying, and the amount of detail in this novel, and the amount of philosophy in this novel, and the way it's laid out into explaining the kind of the will to power that a very small sliver of our populations actually have, because we as normal citizens, we think that will to power, that will to dominate other people, we don't know people like that, do we? We don't know them, but they're in this book and they exist today. And as I say, it kind of blows the lid off any illusions you might have about the government is there for the people and there are of benign intent. So really, really quite shocking, this book, and reading it again. And for me, I would urge anybody who's got a half interest in politics or has children and is worried about the next generation. It's not for me to say, but I'll say it anyway. You owe it to yourself to pick up this book once every few years and remind yourself about how far governments can go. And if you're a legislator, and there'll be none of those watching this video, you should be obliged to be, Clockwork Orange style, to be sat in a chair with your eyelids prized open. You should be, every year, you should be forced to read this novel to say, this is the line you do not cross. Anyway, that's me pontificating a little bit. But yeah, 1984, fantastic, but scary as hell. There's my glasses. There you go. So anyway, album purchases and my favorite listens in the last month or so, and two or three books that have kind of got me going this particular month. So hopefully that's I'm back on the trail of making videos, and I hope to see you on the next one. And hopefully we won't have to wait so long until the next one comes along. So if you've got this far, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.